Hi, my name is Peter, and you're listening to the Anxiety Fitness Podcast, a show where we talk about anxiety, panic, and mental health in general. And for this first episode, we'll be speaking to Dr. Rita Santos, a clinical psychologist and CBT psychotherapist who specializes in anxiety. Dr. Santos has also recently released her book, Navigating Panic Attacks, to help you understand your fear and reclaim your life. I highly recommend you check out this book if you deal with panic attacks. This episode was streamed live on Tevent, a new virtual events and community platform. Make sure to join the Anxiety Fitness community on Tevent if you want to be involved in the next conversation live. And if you haven't already, go ahead and follow me at Anxiety Fitness on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. I hope you enjoy this episode and learn something that can truly help you. So let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Anxiety Fitness Podcast. My name is Peter, and today we're going to be joined by Dr. Rita Santos, who is a clinical psychologist and CBT psychotherapist, and she's the author of the recent book, Navigating Panic Attacks, which we'll talk a little bit about today as well. So please, I'd welcome Rita to join the stage. Hello.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So why don't we start with learning a bit about you? So, what exactly is it you do? How did you get into, the whole mental health field?
Well, going down memory lane. So I started getting interested into anxiety very early on in my training. So I decided to be a psychologist early on as well. I was about 19, kind of university go-to age. I was actually planning to be a nurse, but then panicked as I got in and decided that was not for me, and kind of wanted to help people in a different way. And when different approaches were set in front of me and I started having placements and started trying to work with different difficulties, anxiety was the one that really caught my interest and my heart, really. And so I started joining placements of psychiatric institutions and behavioral departments, working with people with severe anxiety. And for some reason, it just got my heart, and I've never been interested in anything else. So I've been working with anxiety and anxiety related difficulties for over 20 years now. I'm still a strong believer I don't know everything, and I keep still searching, everything I can about it and wanting to learn more and to help people the best I can every step of the way. But it's I don't know if I can justify exactly why it catches my heart that way, but it does.
Yeah.
I think my best explanation would be that I find it a very interesting emotion because it's so important for us as human beings to survive, but it can also be so detrimental. So I find it quite an interesting one in that respect.
Okay. So it's something that just seems to, interest you so much, but you don't really know exactly why.
I'm not sure I can give you a specific reason, but it's I think it's just a very important emotion for us as human beings and can be so detrimental. And I am also really impressed with our ability to bring it down to a normal level, really, after it becomes quite detrimental. So I think maybe that's the key there. It just the work and working with people with it just grabs me. I'm just there. Yeah.
And so, do you think anxiety has always been, the way we see it today is it's affecting us in our social lives? We're always often worried about things like health anxiety and things like that. And I always wondered, in kind of the beginning of humanity, before we kind of had these systems as well, do you think people would have suffered with anxiety in the same ways?
Potentially, maybe not always with such detriment or impairing functioning as much, but anxiety is in a big way related with our anticipation of what comes next. and anticipating
Yeah.
danger. And actually, we know from cognitive or cognitive psychology research that was the ability to start anticipating what comes next that actually contributed to development of
Yeah.
our cognition, our ability to think. So I'm assuming that even at those stages, anxiety played a very important role in our ability to not only get out of a cave and find a lion, but to start thinking that if I get out, there might be a lion out there. So anxiety started have a very important, or started to have a very important function at that stage of anticipating what comes next and our ability to um, protect ourselves, really heading
Yeah.
to survival. So anticipation has been there for a long time. I guess it will be detrimental at any stage of society, let's say, or whatever century. But it might manifest in relation to different things. Whereas these days, yes, it might be potentially health or I don't know, the state of the nation, let's say it. But I guess that's also related with development itself, the access we have to
Yeah.
information all the time.
Because
Yeah.
I guess it makes a lot of sense that you know, the I guess the use of anxiety is to, you know, think, okay, that if I'm going to go outside, there may be some danger out there, so I have to be prepared. And at a certain level, that's quite useful, isn't it? But I guess it starts to
Absolutely.
become a problem when we start to kind of always
Mm.
anticipate the worst danger and then also believe that as well. And then you start getting all the physical symptoms alongside
Yeah.
with that. So that
Yeah.
it's a very interesting emotion. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was wondering as well, like with anxiety and with how much it can kind of take over. Um, what do you think? You know, how can you explain that? How can you explain how anxiety takes over and why, you know, people start to develop things like panic attacks and stuff like that?
Oh, what an interesting question. I think um, when we start, let's say, anticipating things that can be dangerous to us, we're going to start developing some ways of coping that
Mm.
might work for us at that specific point in time, but might not be the most helpful ones in terms of how our brain learns about things. So, if, for example, you need to be home, let's say at 4:30, and your bus is at 4 or 4:10, and you are arriving to the bus stop and you see the bus there, but you're still not at that distance, sounds like he's going, and you start running and you start panicking that you need to get on the bus because you really need to be home. You're
Yeah.
actually potentially going to have a panic attack. However, you're not going to interpret it like that. Okay, so it was a very important thing. You got anxious, you had a lot of the sensations. You get on the bus, you ran really fast, got on the bus, you're probably sweaty, your heart is racing, you might have some other physical sensations, but you're not going to care less. It's understandable why you're having those sensations. However, if you have an episode like that, but the situation you are in at that point in time is not justifiable, let's say there's no bus to be caught, or you're not in danger of losing the bus at that point in time, but you're anticipating something, if you have those sensations, instead of identifying them like something that makes sense, you're going to identify them as something that actually means something is wrong.
Okay.
Um, Now you try to protect yourself. So it's two things at play there. It's not only your interpretation, but also what you do at that point to cope. That is going to be a bit of a problem. Then you start getting used to those behaviors, those interpretations, and they become quite habitual. And that in the long term creates a bit of a problem and a potential trigger for further panic attacks
Wow.
or
So
anxiety, if you want.
so is it can be actually to do with, you know, the natural responses that your body will do when you're nervous or anxious. You can actually start to interpret those as the danger,
Yeah.
and then start to do things like, you know, avoiding situations and things like that. Um,
Yeah. In fact, the panic attack, if you don't mind me interrupting you, is a misinterpretation of those physical sensations that you experience.
And a lot of people describe a panic attack as being, one of the worst things they've experienced. So how can that be so powerful if we, even if, they'll say, I've had a panic attack, but it was one of the worst things, or I'm about to have a panic attack. If you know it's a panic attack, surely that should make it, easy to go away.
Sure, but a panic attack is called a panic attack because it's really strong and is very powerful and is very, very unpleasant. Especially again, if you don't have that lion in front of you, or if you don't have the whatever potential danger that they designed for happening at that point in time. So if you have a really sudden urge of very intense fear and you can't really place it at that point in time, like it doesn't make sense, that is terrifying. And the sensations are very unpleasant. So it's called a panic attack for a reason. So it's very intense, very sudden, very strong, and it happens in a very very short period of time. Like its surgence is very quick.
Yeah.
So it's not going to feel good at all.
And
So just knowing it's not sufficient because there's a big discrepancy between what you feel and what you know, and what you feel is going to win because it's very strong and it's very unpleasant.
yeah, because I know many people definitely, especially when they realize they have panic attacks and they're dealing with it, working through them. Even it feels like, okay, I know what's going on, so I should be able to better prepare myself next time. But they still end up, it's almost as if your rationality goes out the window in that moment. But maybe you could help us with some ideas of what can you do in those moments to kind of, ground yourself, or what should we be doing when we start panicking?
So before, you need to have a good understanding of what anxiety is, what is actually happening during a panic attack, and all of that. If you don't have that information, it's going to be hard to feel motivated to stay with it, or to do nothing about it.
Right.
As human beings, we problem solvers. We are survivors, and we're going to try and survive and protect ourselves the best we can. The problem is that the anxiety is there already to do that. And by trying to stop it or controlling it, we interfering with the process itself. Okay, so it's not going to be very beneficial. So my first advice would be to have a good understanding of what they are, and what they mean, and if they are indeed dangerous or not.
And
If you acquire a good understanding of that, sorry, you're going to
continue.
If you gain a good understanding of that, then you might feel compelled to take it a bit further. And to do that, the best way to allow things to get better and improve is to actually gradually start dropping some of those protective behaviors that we have been or started adopting to try to control it, or to cope with it in any way, shape, or form. Now, if you try to do that in one go and just tolerate it, that can be very intense and might not work. So this links to other things, which is on about how our brains work. So throughout, it can happen after one, it can happen after several panic attacks. Our brain starts learning that we don't like it, that we don't like anxiety, that we don't like the panic attack itself, that is dangerous, and that we should do certain things. So now what we're going to do now is relearn that actually we don't have to do that. And for our brains to learn at that level with such emotional kind of display, let's say, or experience, we need to do it in a gradual way and experiment, getting evidence that actually that might not be the case. So it's a little bit like being scientists, really, and experiment with it and see if I actually don't do the deep breathing, does my breathing actually go back to normal?
That's an
Okay.
interesting one because a lot of people do recommend, oh, take a deep breath when you have a panic attack or things like that. But I've recently heard that that might not actually be a good idea. So
Mm.
why is that? So
So
can you
all
go
the
deeper in
evidence.
like the safety behaviors and things like that? And
So safety behaviors are those things we develop or are urged to do to keep ourselves safe, basically, and to protect ourselves. So if we talk about coping, like if it's raining, we take an umbrella, we are coping, okay? But a safety behavior is a behavior, or a protective behavior is a behavior you do to keep yourself safe in a particular situation. So deep breathing is something that people can read out there, hear about it, but is not going to work very well for quite high levels of anxiety, panic attacks. It might provide some relief at that point in time, but in the long term is creating the right platform for other panic attacks to occur. The reason for that to happen is that every time you do that, your brain is learning that if you didn't, something bad was going to happen. And
wow.
therefore, the next time you are in the situation or you have a symptom, your brain has now learned that you need to do deep breathing or something bad's going to happen. And therefore, is going to enter into survival mode, which means takes the anxiety even higher. Okay?
Wow.
So, all those protective behaviors we use as far as anxiety is concerned are actually quite detrimental because the information our brains are getting is that if we do that, something bad's going to happen. So the likelihood of it coming back is higher.
So that's even if they do provide some short-term relief,
Mhm.
in the long run, it could be making things a bit worse. Wow. And so we've talked a bit about like panic attacks and how they can come on and through, anticipation and, thoughts and things like that. But I know a lot of people deal with anxiety and specifically panic attacks at night, waking them up. Do you know, is that the same thing as a panic attack that you'd get in the day, or is that something different?
Yeah,
Is that a different mechanism going on?
pretty much similar mechanism. Although you don't have the stimulation of your daily environment, your brain throughout sleep is still archiving information and is processing memories, and therefore is dealing with memories that can be slightly frightening to you or that have some kind of anxiety related meaning. So while the brain does all that processing, there might be processing a situation that happened during the day, that it's archiving their memory, and therefore you might have a panic attack. You can wake up in panic. So panic attacks can come out of the blue, can be sudden. You can have it overnight. You can have it anytime, unfortunately.
Wow. And so dealing with that would be the same as in just trying to allow not react to, or not react, but not do a special behavior to get rid of it. Wow.
Which
Okay.
sounds terrifying. I'm very sure it sounds terrifying in
Yeah.
itself.
But that
Mhm.
that's another question that I was thinking about because we hear that acceptance and just allowing things to happen,
Mm.
without kind of fighting or fighting it is helpful for panic attacks. But I think for a lot of people, it's hard to understand what does that actually mean. What does just accept it, or what does just allow it to happen? What does that really mean? Can you go into a bit more detail of like that?
Yeah, I can give you some examples, which is I get on the train and I realize that, the doors are closed
Yeah.
and I start having some sensation. So now I'm not just worried about the doors are closing, or closed, but I'm worried about the fact that my heart is racing, my breathing is changing, I'm not feeling well, the anxiety is going up. Now my cognitions or my thoughts go into I need to escape. I'm going to move closer to the door. The anxiety keeps getting up. I'm now on full panic mode. I want to get out of here.
Mm,
Okay, so I'm going to try and control my breathing. I'm going to drink water. I'm going to try and start paying attention to the time to see when is the next stop. I'm going to try and plan an exit route for as soon as I can. All of it. I'm using a lot of safety behaviors right there, protective behaviors. Okay, so I'm planning that exit plan. I'm trying to understand what I'm feeling. I'm telling myself it's dangerous. I'm drinking some water, controlling my breathing. So I'm trying to control that anxiety and planning an escape route. Okay, because if I get there, something bad's going to happen, and that can vary. It can be I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm going to collapse. I'm going to faint. It could be it's very idiosyncratic. Everybody can have different kind of fears related with that. Okay. However, what I'm not doing by focusing on the sensations and trying to play fruit is that actually there's enough here for me to breathe. The train is just having the normal journey. I am having anxiety because I'm anticipating something going wrong, but actually nothing is going wrong right now. And therefore, I don't really need to do anything else but focusing on what I'm doing right now, my life right now, not on what I am anticipating. Does that make sense? So I don't need to control my breathing. I don't need to drink the water. I don't need to focus on what the door is. I don't need to move towards the door. I don't need to create an escape plan, because right now, actually, where I am is very different than what's going on in my head. Okay, so in that sense, what just happened in a very logical way, because if I'm not okay, I'm going to try and do something about it. It's very logical. However, what I am doing at that point in time is interfering with a normal course of anxiety, which was there simply to protect me when I anticipated that something bad can happen. So if we do that, our brains are going to activate a survival response. And that's what we are feeling. Right? So if we then interfere with that response, we're interfering with that natural process, because the anxiety will go down and it's not dangerous. Don't know if that's a good example.
No, I think that's a great example, because especially because it's so different for everyone. Like, everyone has their own situation. I think putting it into an example like that, and telling you how you can identify what are the things that you do in that situation that perhaps are not helping, or what are things that you should just allow to happen. So I think that's a really great way to talk about it. One of the things that interests me as well is the power of the thoughts that come into our minds. So, for example, what if I know a one that I have a lot is, what if it's not anxiety this time? That's a very, what if it's really something, medical happening this time? How can you kind of navigate that line between, you know, ending up always going to the doctor, asking what's wrong, and understanding that, okay, yes, I understand that these are anxiety, symptoms, or this is what I feel like when I'm anxious, but also it can pop up into new different feelings all the time. How do you navigate that line of believing yourself, basically, believing what the doctor says?
Of course, it's tricky because, again, you are in a bit of a war between what you know and what you feel, and your feelings are so powerful. They're really winning that war, basically. Now, there's several questions to ask there. So what do we know about medical conditions? Is it something that comes and goes? If I have a heart problem and if I was about to have a heart attack, if I controlled my breathing and sat down, would that mean I would not have a heart attack? Is that the medication we could go for people that suffer from heart conditions? They see my point, but which is logical to think about and makes sense when we're not under that terrifying experience. Because when we are under that terrifying experience, we feel the urge to, and very compelled to go and resolve the problem right now.
Yeah.
But it's quite different from a medical condition. And normally, when you have a medical problem, the symptoms persist for quite a while. It's not something that comes and goes. And actually, a panic attack doesn't last forever. We're not designed to be in that state of elevated anxiety for long periods of time. So anxiety and panic occurs in a bell-shaped curve. It goes up and then it goes down. Okay. So when we do the behaviors we normally do to try and protect ourselves, we actually don't experience that anxiety coming down naturally. So we
Uh,
don't quite believe that it's not dangerous.
so we never give ourselves the chance to see that it's going to go down, and then we end up just doing some escaping the situation right
Yeah,
when it's at the top. So you never realize that if you continue just allowing it to happen, then it'll go down.
absolutely. And
Uh,
our brains learn more when emotions are involved, and threatening emotions really almost, how can I say, promote learning. So if we protected ourselves in any way at that specific point in time, that's when your brain is really taking that information on board, kind of really almost recording that if I didn't do that, something really bad would have happened. And that's the
mm,
experience you have as a person, and therefore is going to be very meaningful to you and very, very difficult to let go of.
yeah.
Very difficult. And this conversation we're having, hopefully will help some people having some understanding, and will contribute to people learning to manage the anxiety a little bit better. But if you got to a quite serious position, sometimes it's very difficult to do it by yourself, and you might need a little bit of help.
I
Um,
see.
yeah.
And I was thinking about what you said about, panic attacks, they get to a top and they go down. What if I know a lot of people feel like the panic itself can be dangerous.
Mm.
And how do you dispel that? Can panic be dangerous? Can you panic so much that something bad actually can happen? A lot of people worry about, oh, I'm going to lose control, or what if I do something dangerous when I panic, or even what if my heart races so much
Mm.
that I do have, a heart attack or some sort of heart problem. What can you say about,
Now,
that? Yeah.
I can say that in the whole history of research we have on these things, all our understanding of anxiety, and I can add to that 20 years of more than 20 years at the moment working with people that have anxiety, and a lot of them panic attacks. That has never been the case. We have no research indicating that a panic attack can lead to any of that.
Mm,
Okay, so normally is the protective behaviors that actually put people in trouble, really, because if you don't like medical settings or needles and you have panic attacks because of that, you avoid going to the doctor, do the exams you need to do to keep yourself healthy. If you have, for example, difficulties driving or panic attacks driving, it's not the panic that is the problem, but the fact that you are now holding the steering wheel very tight.
mm,
You highly focus on anything. You're slowing down. You're just using one lane. You're not taking over, and you're not actually paying attention to the whole world picture. You're focused on yourself and protecting yourself. Right. So those are the behaviors that can actually be quite consequential rather than the anxiety itself. So a panic attack is a survival response, and that's something we've been developing throughout millions of years of evolution. And so it keeps us safe. It's actually not something that is there to harm you. It's something that your body activates to keep yourself safe. So if you're thinking that something might go wrong, or you might have a heart attack, or you might have this and that, your system is going to activate a panic response. And
mm,
that's what I was trying to say with the bus example. I can give you a snake example. Okay, if a snake shows up in front of you, you're going to have a panic attack, but you're not going to make anything out of it because you understand why you're having it at that point in time.
mm,
So it's harder to understand when you're anticipating because the problem is not there in front of you. So
yeah.
what you feel doesn't quite match the environment you are in. And that is going to make you more fearful, which in a way intensifies the experience itself. So almost by then being fearful of the fear, having fear of fear is exacerbating that fear itself. It's almost like having another panic attack on top of it. Right?
Ah. And so,
And now,
oh, I noticed that with panic and the feeling of it, it's interesting how say you're watching a TV program that's very, intense. You get these feelings and you get these emotions, but usually you are aware that, oh, okay, I'm watching something that is, frightening. But at the same time, does that show us that there's something? Does our mind really know the difference between, something real and something something that's imagined? So like a real day, if there was a real lion out there, why do we react the same when we see a character on the screen facing a lion and we
Mhm.
still get all these emotions? What does that say about the mechanism behind our, our protective, this
Because
fight
we
or flight?
have been throughout the years, we've been receiving information from our environment, and our brain is coding everything. And we learn
Mm,
a lot about certain things being dangerous and potentially damaging for ourselves. And that information is stored in our memories. And for some people, some things are going to be more anxiety eliciting than for others, depending on their learning experiences. Um, so you have people that are scared of spiders because their parents were, and they saw that vicariously. We actually have quite a bit of research showing that people can learn just by instruction. And by that, I mean by hearing something in the news or reading something in a newspaper. You can actually become quite reactive, anxiety wise, to particular things just by instruction itself. So we are learners, we die learning. Okay, so from
mm,
day one, we learning, and we gathering information constantly through our senses. So hearing, smell, taste, touch. All, our brain is constantly collecting information and adjusting to the environment. So some experience that we might have had in our lives, some things that we have learned, um, kind of created some awareness to that. And at
yeah.
some point, you might get quite reactive to it, or you might have developed a little switch that might never turn
Mm.
on, but for some reason might turn on, and you become quite fearful of specific things.
That kind of
And it really, sorry, go for it.
well, you just reminded me when you said about, we're always constantly learning things. And I know specifically for people that deal with health anxiety, um, there's a kind of effect, I guess, that happens. For example, if you watch a medical program or you see something on the news that happens, they start to have the symptoms of whatever disease or whatever, thing they were watching. How does that work? Or why can we, and it can sometimes be very accurate. You see someone having a chest pain, and then a few minutes later, you start having some kind of chest pain or arm pain, and how does that work, and what does that have to do with anxiety and things like that?
I'm not sure if it's that as clear
Yeah.
as you just explained. You start focusing on yourself more and monitor
Okay.
yourself more. So in that situation, for a lot of people, and it's also related with having had some experiences with people unwell in their families, being unwell themselves at some point, having had an experience with a doctor that missed something, or also by instruction as well, the constant awareness and reminder we have these days that the world is dangerous, that there's problems there for you, that things can happen. So if you are more vulnerable for some reason at some point in your life, you might start getting a bit worried about that. Now, if occurs to me, oh, maybe I will have um, some cancer. Okay, but I might have that thought. We have loads of thoughts in our lives, right? I might kind of just hope that I don't, or I'm going to start checking myself.
Mm,
Now, if I start checking myself, I'm going to feel things that I've never felt before. And now there's a little node I feel just here, which is probably quite normal, but I don't know anything about it. I'm not a doctor. And now I'm going to start touching and poking it several times a day, right? So, what do you think is going to happen with that straight away
yeah, that's probably,
if I start poking it,
yeah,
touching it
might get
constantly?
a bit swollen, might start feeling more problems with it.
And
Mm,
the next step you tend to kind of go for is start researching the symptoms online. And I'm sure most of you here agree that if you search anything online, the cancer word will come straight away,
mm,
no matter what you search. So you're going to start having some reinforcing kind of idea in there So you're going to start monitoring more, paying more attention, start being quite hypervigilant, and you're going to start with developing quite a lot of what ifs. So you're starting building up a bit of a network there, a fear straight away about something that you really didn't have in the first place.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that describes the progression really well. And I know a lot of people feel like, okay, well, I have these, I always think I have this, or I always think I have that, or I'm always worrying about the most irrational things. Are people with anxiety just being irrational, or is it something deeper than that?
I don't like to call it irrational because I think it's actually very logical most of the time. If I'm
Mhm.
not okay, if I have concerns, to explore my potential or the potential scenarios and put things into place for it. So as human beings, we are actually designed to do that. We're problem solvers above anything else, and our priority is to survive. So a lot of these behaviors and these ways we have of dealing with things are quite normal and adaptive for us to be able to survive the world we live in. They just become a problem when they start interfering with your life.
Mm.
Okay? So when you start overdoing it, when you start not managing to do things because of the anxiety, when it starts being quite intense, taking over. Okay, so that's when we need to do something about it. But all of us do some of these behaviors and have some of these thoughts occasionally. So I'm not sure if irrational is my preferred or word in terms of the psychology literature and world out there. I think in a lot of ways things can be quite rational and logical for
Mm.
that specific person in that specific situation, if that makes sense. So saying that, what the brain is doing is engaging that problem solving pattern of really considering a lot of scenarios and escape routes and ways of resolving it. And some of them, we could argue, depending whatever language you want to use, that sound quite irrational, especially if we are looking at someone else because we're not on that person's shoes, so we don't understand the logic behind it.
Mm.
So in a lot of ways, my look irrational doesn't mean for that specific person. It is at that point in time.
That makes a lot of sense. I was thinking, how can we, what, I was just wondering, but when we do kind of try and find these logical conclusions to, a pain that you have, and you think, okay, well, if I have a pain in my head, why would that be? Or maybe it's just a headache. Well, why is there a headache? Why do I have a headache? What's the relationship between, the kind of un b- being not being able to bear uncertainty? So
Mm.
I know other people will just be like, "Oh, I have a headache. I have a headache. That's it. Fine." And they can just get on with their day. But for people with anxiety, it's why do I have a headache? What is the exact reason? And then you start jumping to those catastrophic conclusions. And so what's this about this, this uncertainty thing?
Oh, intolerance of uncertainty is a
Mm.
big thing.
Yeah.
We could do another whole other session on that in
Yeah.
itself. Um, but is we have this idea somehow that if we know and if we can make it certain, we will cope better. But actually, intolerance of uncertainty is actually one of the highest predictors we have for worrying. So the more you want to make something certain, the more you're going to worry about it. And that's another avenue, is another conversation. But it's a very similar thing. You don't want to engage with that process at all. So if I go back to your example, what you want at that point in time is to say, okay, and why am I asking all these questions and getting so alarmed by this?
Mm.
Am I anxious about something else? Is there something in my life I'm not feeling that much okay about or in control of? Then now I need to control this headache and I need to know everything about it. Or could it be just an headache? So the idea there would be, if it's just an headache, it is it likely to be here in today's time? So if it's not here in today's time, I'll do something about it then, or I'll
Mm.
worry about it then. Until then, I'm going to treat it as an headache, and you let the anxiety go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah,
No, that's a good technique, I think, and a lot of people will find that very useful because
yeah.
it's
Same
so
thing
easy
as
to get.
anything you feel,
Yeah.
as with anything you feel. Yeah,
Yeah. It's so easy to get attached to just any sensation, and you're stuck worrying about that for, weeks. Um,
absolutely. I tend to tell my clients that if it was easy to do any of this, I would not have a job. It's really
yeah.
not easy, and it can be, somewhat and sometimes a bit easier to understand is absolutely not easy to deal with and do all these things.
Mm.
It's almost like a leap of faith.
Yeah.
Um, um, but I tend to say it's a rocky road and it's a hard road, but it's the road people are in with anxiety is quite rocky and hard too. And this road to get out of it is rocky and hard, but it's to get out of it,
Yeah.
not to stay in it. But they're both difficult. There's really no magic pill.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is really about relearning. So the brain started learning something that doesn't really work for you, and we're going to have to relearn how to befriend the anxiety rather than being scared of it. Is actually a very
Yeah.
important question for us as human beings, and we don't want it. And so the job here is to actually wanting it, to befriend with it, which is a
Mm.
really hard concept to take in if your experience with it is not that pleasant.
Yeah. And so about like there is no easy way out. That's a very interesting. There's no magic pill to just take it away, and and what you really have to do, I guess, what what I think you're saying is you have to face the uncomfortableness. You have to
Mm.
actually go into the things that make you uncomfortable and allow this to happen rather than trying to find a way around it. Um, and I know
Yeah.
that a lot of people go to seek out things like therapy for to get help with this, but I know that that's not accessible for everyone, or maybe the waiting list are long, or maybe it's inaffordable for them. And what advice would you give to someone who can't immediately get something like therapy at the moment? What can they do to kind of um, deal with this situation?
So there are in the NHS services, some areas have longer lists than other, but you have the IAPT services. There's anxiety and depression, and they are efficient. Um, and so that's the right way to go, and that's for
Mm,
free. Um, the other route, if you have to wait 6 months for an appointment, is to get yourself informed. So the things I was saying
mm,
today and we've been chatting about, I started with the first thing to do is to understand it. So I actually don't believe, and I would not recommend that you try and drop all these behaviors that you urge to do to keep yourself safe without believing and understanding what is actually happening in your body and brain. Okay. So I think what you can do is start getting a bit informed about that. So some self-help books are a good way of getting that information. Now, sometimes it's tricky because there's so much out there, and not everything comes from the right places or from the people that are, more advisable to write those. So you have a lot of people speak about their personal experiences, which is great, but you're going to
mm.
find people, for example, recommending the breathing and other things. So in that respect, it's been very kind of you to talk about my book today.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make any sales here today. I didn't make the book to get any income whatsoever. It was a way of getting, I don't know, all my life out on paper, basically.
Yeah.
I love what I do, um, and then these sometimes reach out to therapists. Therapists as myself, we sometimes do things at lower rates. We always have some spaces for at lower rates. Um, and do some concessions, and also discussing with GP if the anxiety is really severe, actually start with some medication to take the edge off a little
Yeah.
bit, and then go and work on the cause rather than just the symptoms, it's also a good strategy. But is that information and try slowly to understand it first.
Yeah. And if you just joined recently, the book that we talked about is called Navigating Panic Attacks. I don't know if you can see that very well. Um, but I've read it, and I found it very useful, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I think you'll find useful too if you deal with panic attacks. So please check it out. You can just Google Navigating Panic Attacks by Dr. Rita Santos, and you will find that, and it's a great book. I do see we have one question in the questions area, which I think we should answer, and then we can head over to the discussion room if anyone wants to join or kind of jump on camera and ask your questions yourself. But we have one question or two questions here. Maybe we can get those really quickly. In order to learn how to properly cope or control the panic attack, is it important to know where our anxiety comes from, like from trauma or health issues?
No, not at all. Okay, so I would think if it's from very traumatic experiences, might be a good idea. And an example that I can get in terms of that is, for example, if you have anxiety in a social situation or talking to other people, and you've been under quite a few episodes of abuse before in your life, it's going to make a lot of sense that trust in others is not totally there. So the anxiety might require, or working with that anxiety might require, do a bit on work on the trauma as well, on the abuse and all the traumas. But generally, panic attacks, um, for normally the presence of panic attacks don't necessarily require the understanding where things come from for it to be successful in terms of changing it. And by saying this, I think would be maybe important to say that we're not talking about treatments or cure, because this is not a disease. Okay, this is an emotional dysregulation. So anxiety is a normal emotion, and what we want is not curing it. We want to bring it down to a level that is manageable, that doesn't interfere with life, to let anxiety do what it's supposed to do. So we're not curing anything, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And we have one more. Do you think CBT is the best option to deal with high anxiety, or would it be better to include some sort of treatment involving the rest of the body?
There's loads of things that you can do.
Yeah.
As far as evidence is concerned, the research that we have, and my personal, not just mine, colleagues I work very closely to, the CBT framework is the most efficient thing in terms of working with anxiety. It doesn't work for everything. It's really good for anxiety. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
For anxiety, again, I say it again, not for everything, but definitely for anxiety. We don't have any evidence that any other things do. So mindfulness, compassion work, meditation, all those things that have been quite popular recently, actually, we have no evidence they are actually useful with high levels of anxiety. They might be at very early stages, low levels of anxiety, but not for high levels of anxiety. They actually work as a protective behavior. Your brain learns that if they don't do that, or if you don't do that, something bad's going to happen and you cannot cope. So it's actually in the long term is adding to the problem.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
that's for the questions. So thank you everyone for your questions. And I think that's a good place to finish up for now. I'd like to thank you again for joining us. And thank you so much, Dr. Rita, for coming here and sharing your knowledge and expertise as well. And I think we're going to go to the discussion room now if anyone wants to join, and we'll just be in there for 10 minutes or so, and we can talk and kind of, if you have any more burning questions or anything like that, or just things you want to ask, please come join us on the call, and we'll see you there. So how to get there, you just click the back button, and then you'll see the discussion room. in the event area. So again, thank you everyone for being here. Do check out the book, Navigating Panic Attacks. I highly recommend it. And it's a really good read, and it's really quite precise as well. It makes, puts all this clinical knowledge into a very simple and easy to understand way. So I highly recommend that, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me and for listening.
Thank you.
Okay.
And we'll see you, everyone. Goodbye in the discussion room, hopefully. Yeah.